the spite and the bullying and yes, the evil of the Chinese dictatorship, that's been on full display yet again. But it's now so shameless, so deranged, that it's almost funny. Now, I don't mean those threats we got today from the Chinese embassy. I'll get to that. That's a little more serious. But let me show you how ludicrously far these communist bullies will go, like they're bad actors playing the villain in some cheap B movie. Iceland, tiny Iceland, way up there in the Arctic Ocean. It joined the European Union in saying that China was committing a crime against humanity by locking up to 1 million Muslim Chinese in concentration camps, and that it would join Europe in blacklisting Chinese officials responsible for these atrocities. China has now hit back. Now, this superpower decided, well, if China's blacklisting Chinese officials committing terrible crimes, then it would blacklist an Icelander also doing wicked things. It would ban this criminal from coming to China or holding assets there. So who in all of Iceland did it pick on to punish? Turns out it's this pensioner, Jonas Haraldsson, who says he's a little bit surprised that China has singled him out. Although he's not that worried because he wasn't actually planning to visit China anytime soon. So what did Jonas Haraldsson do that made China decide he was among the worst of the worst, the very worst Icelander, ranked with people committing genocide? Haraldsson's not exactly sure, but he thinks it was some articles he wrote for a daily newspaper over the years. He's retired, he's got time on his hands. In one, he complained that the Chinese embassy in Reykjavik had left its old building derelict and left it a complete mess, an eyesore. In another, he complained about Chinese tourists, saying many people have complained that they, the Chinese, do bad things on organised trips and often do exactly what they see fit, and often with rudeness and aggression instead of obeying the tour guides. But the article he thinks really tipped China over the edge, really made it mad with him, was the one where he complained about what he called the Wuhan virus. And he demanded China pay compensation for all the death and destruction. Anyway, whatever it was, the Chinese embassy last week said Haraldsson must pay because he seriously harms China's sovereignty and interests by maliciously spreading lies and disinformation. Well, that's just hard to believe, isn't it? This pensioner sitting in Iceland, writing the odd cranky bit in the paper, seriously harms China's sovereignty? Seriously? I mean, you have to ask yourself, if China thinks that is a serious danger to its dictatorship, one that must be punished, what do you think it does to anyone inside China who might make even the slightest criticism? And what might it do to any of us that it can get its hands on? I tell you, I sure won't be going to China. Which brings me to China's latest bullying of Australia. Our Foreign Minister has now scrapped Victoria's controversial, in fact, stupid Belt and Road Initiative deal with China.
The determination that we have formed is that they are not consistent with Australia's approach to foreign policy, and under the legislation will be terminated.
Well, no kidding. The Belt and Road Strategy is China's plan to secure ports and supplies in foreign countries so this dictatorship can get stronger. It wants to bind them to it. What idiots the Victorian government were to back something that was so helpful to a brutal regime that throws its weight around, against us in particular, and even doubly stupid for the Victorian government to make it sound like the rest of Australia, like, oh, it's disowning the Morrison government's attitude to China because it's cozying up to this dictatorship. It was splitting our foreign policy stance. And, well, anyway, now that it's scrapped, China has gone nuts again. And again, you know, with all the threats, this is another unreasonable and provocative move taken by the Australian side against China. It is bound to bring further damage to bilateral relations and will only end up hurting itself. That's the Chinese embassy here. And, you know, the Chinese ambassador is the guy last year that said, you know, if you keep doing this, we're going to punish your exports and all that kind of stuff. I sometimes wonder about this bloke, Chen Jingyi. Now, Mr. Cheng, he must know what a good and free country this is. He must be ashamed of China's thuggery. I take him to be a educated man, a cultured man. But I wonder if the ambassador figures, look, I've got to carry on like a cheap movie villain, a mad thug, you know, we have ways of making you talk. We'll get you. Because if he doesn't, what do you think he'll face when he gets back home? For him, if he hasn't towed the line, if he said, oh, look, China, you're quite right, it's a dictatorship and we shouldn't carry on like that. If he didn't say that, or if he said that, what do you think would happen to him? Jail? A bullet? You think I'm too melodramatic? Well, if China thinks that Jonas Haraldsson, up there in tiny Iceland, the retired guy, the pensioner, if he's a serious threat it said, what would it think of its ambassador if he stopped acting like a goon and more like a gentleman?